Well, hello, Val Pratt. Here we are in Warrigal, which is where you live now. And it's a lovely Warrigal morning.
It certainly is. We've still got the wind, but never mind, we'll get by.
Well, now you're living nicely, comfortably in here after a lifetime of probably not living so comfortably. Who were you before you were Val Pratt?
I was Val Gardner, and my father Duncan and my mother Florence. She was a Winterton from Bonavista. My father only came over to the mainland from Tasmania when they settled there in 1906 to get work, and of course he stayed here. Well, Mum and Dad rented a house in Church Street, Warrigal in the younger days. They bought a house opposite the beautiful big state school in the town of Warrigal, where there's 4 houses all the same style, and that's where I lived up till I was married.
You married a country boy. How did you find him?
Well, in those days everybody went to the RSL dances to dance. And my father, Duncan, was a beautiful dancer and used to teach dancing. So it was in our blood, really. And Adi, all the ones had come out from Tetoora Road, and he used to bring quite a number of ones in the old vehicles that they bring. They'd all want rides to come in the old vehicles. And that's where I met him when I was 15 and a half, and he was 18 and a half, I think, or something like that.
He grew up at Tetoora Road.
Yes, that's right. He was the youngest of 10 children, to Eliza and Val Pratt. And they lived on Lardner's Track.
That's a big family out there at Tetoora Road, and I think they were a pioneering mob, weren't they?
Well, I think about 1906. They were a little bit later than some of the others or 3 that when they came across from Poowong. But they were certainly a very vibrant family and community-minded family, absolutely.
So you came from Warrigal, but your father was very well known out at Tetoora Road long before you were.
That's right. It was because of Dad's work with the Shire, driving the trucks to the sand pits at Tetoora Road. It was one this side of the hall, quite a steep hill up, and he had no brakes coming down, he tells us. And then the other one was just around the corner on what was the Brazier Farm, but way back then it was another name altogether.
I like the bit about no brakes because that's a very steep little spot,
It is a very steep little spot, so I suppose he just had to have it in the lowest gear and just hope for the best.
He used to give the kids lifts. He was very popular with them.
Yeah, well, if they knew Dad was working in the area, they'd walk up from their place downhill, uphill all the way to the Corranborough Road, and they'd catch him and get that last little ride to the school. It wasn't far, but they thought that was just marvellous. And they'd all cram in, and even one would sit on his knee because I'd make room, and even those children who were adults, you know, would always remember that. And they still say, I wish your dad was here to do the roads. So he had a very good reputation for being work conscious and doing a good job.
That's lovely. Now, you moved out to Tetoora Road and you would have left behind fairly comfy conditions in Warrigal and not so comfy out there.
Well, we didn't have any luxuries at home either because there were 6 children. I had 4 brothers and a sister. We were always well fed, and Mum was a great dab with the sewing machine and could make anything out of nothing. She suffered ill health. She died at age 59, which was very young in those days. But Dad went on to live till he was in his 99th year, so that's how it goes, isn't it? But no, I moved out there when I was 18 and a half onto a farm at just this side of the Tetoora Road Hall that was owned at that time by his sister Violet and Bob Callum. And we share farmed on that. I think it's 70 or 80 acres, share farmed.
Oh, you wouldn't have had many cows.
Well, nobody did in those days, did they, really? No.
Were you milking by hand?
No. There was machines, and of course I never knew anything about all this, so I had to learn how to leg rope a cow. And it was a back-out shed, you know, the real old-style back-outs. But anyhow, I loved the farm and I loved the cattle, and that's how it was.
Oh, you loved the farm. Well, that's a nice story.
I did love the cows, and I still love the farm, yes.
Now, what were the conditions like? What was your house like? You wouldn't have had a hot water service or anything?
No. There was just the 4 basic rooms, 2 bedrooms and a lounge and a kitchen with a wood stove and a bit of a sink in the corner. No refrigeration or anything like that. And
how did you keep things cool?
Well, you didn't. You had a meet out from the main 4 bedrooms. There was another little sleep out. Then there was the bathroom and laundry in one, which was all unlined, no lining in it. And that was where you had to heat the copper to get your hot water for your baths and do your washing in the old copper. And then there was a little airspace before another room had been built, like a big sleep-out sort of room. And we had a meat safe hanging in the airspace, hoping that, you know, the flies wouldn't find it. Oh dear, she was pretty raw, I'll tell you. But anyhow, that was how it was. We didn't have, I think we had a kitchen suite, no such thing as a lounge suite or any of those fancy things, just your bedroom suite and the kitchen suite. And the cots when the kids come along. There was no mod cons. But anyhow, we were there for 5 years, and then that farm was sold. We'd put a deposit on the 80 acres in Browns Road, but we didn't have a house to live in. So we fossicked around everywhere trying to find something to live reasonably near the farm, but there was nothing. So we ended up renting a house down at Cloverlea, you know, that it was quite away from the farm. So it meant Odie would get up in the morning and go up there to milk, and then he'd go away to work on the potatoes all day, then he'd go back to milk, and then he'd go home to Cloverlea. Well, he never saw the 2 girls virtually till the weekends. We were down there 2 years, and then our brother-in-law, Don Fraser, suggested we line half our barn at the farm where we'd built the cow shed and a barn, and into just 2 rooms, and we could live there. We had no power or anything there, but it didn't matter. It meant we were all going to be there in one place.
Had you had power previously in the other house?
Yes, oh yes, we did at Cloverlea, had power, but we had no power there. We had an engine to start to milk the cows, and but so we had these 2 rooms, and they put some windows along what was the kitchen and a couple for the little bedroom where, and they hadn't put the flashing on, and we got a real east wind rain. And I woke up in the morning and the floor's all covered in water running in, and I'm down on my hands and knees crying and cleaning up this water. I said, oh, what are we in here for? Anyhow, we got over that and we lived there quite comfortably, really, for 4 years. And I kept it as clean as any other place. But we eventually...
What was the floor?
Well, we'd put down some lino in the first house at Tetoora Road, a green lino. So we took that with us and put that on the floor in the kitchen and the barn.
Because what was otherwise dirt floor, was it? Or it had a wooden floor?
No, it was just timber floor, and Odie had a chaff cutter just outside, and of course he used to cut chaff, and one of our second eldest daughter, Cheryl, used to suffer from bronchial things, and so he had to stop cutting chaff because it was just not good. And then we'd had an old bath just sitting out in the other part of the barn, so he'd light the copper and boil the water for any bath, then he'd carry the buckets in to have a bath. Do you want to hear something funny about that?
Yes.
One night he's in the bath out there, and all of a sudden his sister Norma and her husband walk around the corner. And Norma says, and Jodie jumps out and gets his towel, because she was 14 when he was born, and she looked after him. She said, nothing I haven't seen. It was so funny. So funny. But anyhow, we were quite happy there because it meant that when Odie was away all day working, after milking, I could have the cows up in the afternoon, you know, at the dairy and ready. If I could get the engine started, I could start, but it was, you know what those big old engines were. It was a bit of a temperamental thing. Sometimes I could, sometimes I didn't.
That would have been a diesel engine, I suppose, would it?
I don't know what it was, but it was noisy and it made a big noise. But anyhow, it made it much easier. But then he had to put a toilet way up the back paddock somewhere because the Shire wouldn't let you put it anywhere near it. So it was all, and he built a shed up the back for a store shed for the chooks and things like that, and his workshop, he did that up there. And we had no driveway made into the place, so we had to take the cans up to the road with the horse and cart.
That's the milk cans, not...
Yeah, the milk cans, up to the road. But eventually we did the track, and I say we were 4 years in the barn before we built a house. Oh, the day we moved up, it was wet, it was horrible, it was in July. But anyhow, and Bruce was only little, so we moved into this house with practically no furniture, but they just loved the fire. They lit the fire, and we had a fire to keep us warm because we only had a radiator in the other place.
That would have been a lovely day because there would have been some cold, hard winters. The east wind used to cop it terribly there.
And over the years, the trees, when I was out there the other day, you don't see the house much now because at last we've got some shelter. Because I said to Bruce one day about it, and he said, well, Mum, you planted those plane trees in the line went up there. So we said, they've grown and they've sheltered it a bit. But
Lucky you can run on love, isn't it?
oh, absolutely, absolutely. I mean, a lot of farm girls wouldn't do the work I did. They'd say, oh, I'm going to do that. But I did everything from yakking the car yard manure and the rest of it, and it was just your life. And I was always at the shed, and the children had to look after each other down through the lines and that sort of thing, and until they were to go to school, and then I'd take some up to one school and then the others had to go to school bus. And that's where we were, and Adi always wanted to be there forever, but he wasn't.
So what about your neighbours at that time when you were living in the converted barn? What kind of circumstances were other people living in? They'd be in houses, most of them, wouldn't they?
That's right. They were all in houses, but there was no flash fancy houses. They were all just comfortable homes at that period. But we have Ian and Ivy Hayward were our first neighbours when we went there, and because we sort of was up there milking, then going home to Cloverleaf for meals, and a lot of the time while we were there, Ivy'd say, oh, come and have some tea with us before you go home, you know, all this sort of thing. They were just brilliant neighbours, and we stayed friends right when they shifted over to right over Yannick Way until they both passed away, but they were really kind to us, and we all got on well. And I'll tell you a little funny story. Ian came over one day and he wanted to borrow the crowbar. He said, and I want the chap that goes with it. So Adi went over and did whatever he wanted to do.
And as a town girl, how did you find harvest time? Because that's quite a load.
Wow, that was something to be seen, to be believed. There was about 7 different Pratt families all worked together to do the harvest. So you were going from farms all around Tetoora Road and down to Ellenbank. There was Jim and Jeff and Ray and Adi and Snowy. And they'd work it, some are on red soil and some are on grey soil. So the red soil's ready before the grey soil, so they'd do 2 runs on it all round. And it was all small. First of all, when I first went out there, it was stacks. They were making the stacks.
The beautiful loose haystacks?
Yes, and Adi said that the Pratt families I made, how many in one year? It was a big number. 15 or something, big those stacks. They did one the first year I was married out there on that hill farm. Oh yes, and the food, you know, you'd cart it up in a clothes basket. I had a lot of learning to do there with all the cooking and the things that had gone there, but anyhow, over the years, and they used to work all these different farms, and it was all done they'd walk along behind it was the horses and things when I first started, and the carriers, and load them on, and then you'd bring home and load them in the shed. Then they eventually went to the old baler that Snowy had with popped out the small squares, and all these Pratts would walk along, throwing them up on the trucks and trailers and things and carting them around. Oh, it was massive, and they'd go around all the places about twice to get them done. And you might do all this cooking and have everything ready, and then it rained. So, of course, they couldn't do it, so you had to do that all again, and all the meats and sandwiches and cakes. And the thing they liked the most to eat was the little jam drops I made and fruit cake. Just plain things, but the jam drops went great because they loved them. And then, of course, then it went on to round bales. Of course, through the times it went to all easier and make it. But then gradually, then each one of those families had a son coming on to work. So then you'd have Len from Snowy's and Bruce from ours and Billy and them from Jeff's, you know what I mean? So then they had farms, so it just expanded so much. And then there was Margaret Bruce Cole, that was Snowy's daughter and husband. So harvest was a big thing. But the costs were all shared, so it made it a very economical way of doing your hay.
Well, not everyone had to have the whole array of equipment.
No, they all owned the machinery between them, you see, and it was a very economical way. It was just your labour you were using, all your labour, you see.
But there's so much knowledge and skill involved in, for instance, building those early haystacks. That's knowledge handed down since the beginning of time, because there's a lot involved in making them.
It was the first time I'd ever seen that happen. It had happened on our own place.
And you're 80, he would have already understood how to build a proper haystack by the time you were married, wouldn't he?
Oh, absolutely. From a little boy. He worked as a little boy right through, started to milk cows when he was 4 by hand.
And you cut those haystacks with a great big knife too, don't you? You can?
That's right. No, different altogether. So it just transferred right through with the machinery improving and the stacks, and then to little bales, and then to big rounds and all this sort of thing. And so that was massive changes in the harvesting, and then it gradually dwindled down to, in the end, there was only our Bruce and Rod at Snows, and then Rod's gone, so Bruce is on his own now.
I know, well, and that's a bit sad too, because I've grown up with the harvest festival, harvest spirit.
It was just, they all just got on well together, and they just, whose paddock? And of course the cry from the women, they would get through some paddocks and you never knew where they were. Where do I bring the food? Down the back of so-and-so's paddock. How do I get there? For a town girl, I'll tell you, it was...
Well, how would they get there? Walk?
Yeah, well, you'd take a car so far sometimes, then or under a tree round at George Hayward's, and one of the thermoses never come home from there. We were renting land around there at one stage. But my hardest job, when we were at Allen Bank, we were renting land, the slaughterhouse paddock just out the Warrigal there, where the old little slaughterhouse was.
Oh,
we rented that, and we'd have cattle in there and we'd do hay in there. Well, I had to cart food dinner into Warrigal with these 2 little children. You'd have it all cooked and bring it in. And then, you know what a hay basket is, when it's full of grass and goodness knows what, you've got to go home, take everything out and shake it out, start again with all the cups and clean it up. Then I'd go home, then I'd put the little ones to bed and have their sleep, and then I'd get ready for the afternoon tea thing, and then I'd come back into the town with all that and get them out of bed and bring them in. Then you'd go home again and unload all the dirty stuff again, and then you'd go to school and get the other kids from there. Then you'd go over to the bus stop and get the other kids there. Then you'd come home and get the cows up and start to milk. One day I just said, well, I'm not too sure whether I want to do this anymore. Oh, look, you could laugh about it now, but look, honestly, it was just mine. You had to be organised. So, as I say, they were tough times.
A typical country community, the Tetoora Road community, everyone helps each other, and you were lucky to have a hall right central there, and you made a lot of use of it.
Yes, we were very involved in everything in the district, which everybody was then. They were all very community minded, and of course the hall was the centrepiece, and then the school. Our children all went to school there, and Odie and his family all went to school there. And in the war years, 2 of Odie's brothers went to the war, but him and Ray, they were too young, so they had to look after the farm. And they used to have these nights with that, and it was called the Comforts Fund, and it was sort of for the war effort, and they would make nets, and Odie still can make those nets. I suppose they used them to cover things on vehicles in the war. Odie would knit socks, they'd knit socks and all sorts of things. They'd make cakes and send them off to their families and different things. It was, a true district thing. It was before my time.
So Odie was a teenager and he used to knit socks.
He knitted himself a red jumper and he wore it on the hill farm when we were first married, and Billy Wallace used to see him running along the paddocks, and he'd say, Odie's going home for dinner. No, he can still knit, don't worry, he's got very big hands, but he's quite good at that. But no, the hall was the centrepiece of the district, and when I went there, of course, Odie's mother took me up. We were married in November, and I was taken straight up to the hall for the meeting for the Tetoora Road Ladies Club, and I've been a member ever since. That's 70 years. So, and that's been a big part of our lives. We used to have lots of concerts and lots of things they did. They all went. We've got down now. We still meet with 6 or 8 of us every month, the same, but we don't work for things. We used to, work and do money for things, hospitals and all sorts of things that needed money we would work for, which was a great thing and great companionship, absolutely. But they were good farmers because, the Pratts all loved digging in the dirt and they all loved having veggie gardens. Odie grew everything we ate.
Did he? He was a good gardener, eh?
Oh, yes, and he showed at the Warrigal Show for 45 years. winning all these prizes. I've got boxfuls of things. And I used to go with him. I was always on offside if they helping him stack on the truck.
And you played tennis there?
No, I never played a sport, but I carted my children around to everything and went with Adi when he played sport. And I'd always do the afternoon tea. And of course we're involved in the footy club from the word dot. If you're involved in the district, well, you're involved in the school until it closed too. Life was always busy. It's a different era now because a lot of people moving into the districts aren't interested in being part of the district like we were. I don't know why, but...
Well, I think hardship brings people together, and you certainly had your fair share of that in those days, didn't you?
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. And everybody seemed to rely on each other. I know it must have been when my mum died, I think, quite suddenly. And I think it was in November, and we were harvesting, and we sort of went off. And when we come home, some of the men around the district had been and done and finished I think it was a silage stack or something to that effect. But this is just how it was, isn't it? I just loved it out there, and you didn't want to leave, but circumstances with Adi's health just forced us out. But we've still got Bruce on the farm, so we can still go out and see the lovely cattle and that sort of thing. So I'll always be a farmer. I loved it.
And I see you've got a corner devoted down there in your lovely garden here to the old relics from the farm.
Yes, I decided to do something for Adrian when he's not been so well, and I gathered up all these tools and things, and I've put them all together there, and spanners and all the things that would do with the farm. And I didn't tell him about it. He was in hospital, but he didn't come home from hospital, and he's had to go into care. But we're bringing him home a day a week, and I got him out there to show him and sat him down on a chair and Rhonda took a photo. So he didn't say much, but I know in his heart he was really... because he knew what everything was and when it was, and his mind is so sharp. He dates on everything he knows, yeah.
And I like the shovel, and you say that he cut, every time he bought a new shovel, he would cut it down to suit the shape he wanted.
That's right. When you bought a shovel, they're no good like that with it round, so you'd cut them down with the thing up in the shed, and then it's much easier to do. And I find it's very true because I use that shovel here.
Ah.
Yeah, it is much easier. You don't have to use so much energy. Just over 10 years ago, we had to make a big decision to leave the farm, and we came to Warrigal and bought a very nice comfy house, and we have the most beautiful neighbours near and far here who are very good to me and help look after me. Now I'm on my own. I've got a really nice garden which I love. It's all pluses, even though we're getting older and to the end of the road, but there's still a lot to be thankful for, isn't there, no matter what. And as Adi says to me when I go to visit him, we had tough times, didn't we? But, we had a good life. So I suppose that sums it up, doesn't it?
Yes, it certainly does. And you also don't have to heat your own hot water.
No, we don't have to boil up the copper and cart this around. And I used to use put those small bales out. He'd leave some up near the shed. I could feed out to the cattle when he wasn't there. And you were always lifting, and the trees when they were down, I'd always help him. We'd do lifting those great things just before we come in here, So there was a lot of heavy work done, and I'm sure I ended up a good farmer's wife. My way of looking at it, that was Adrian's life. That's what he loved. So it's up to you to follow in, isn't it, and to be part of it. It's no good trying to reject it all the time. I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to milk cows or something. No. That was his life, and that's what he loved. So I loved it too in the end. And we've got nothing but lovely memories from out there of lovely people. The dancers in the halls, the concerts, and all the things that they did. It was just brilliant. And I still go out for a drive just to have a look around out there. If I pick Adi up, comes home or anything, you want to go for a drive, he always wants to go out up Lardner's track, round and back down there where we go. It's always the same. Wants to go and see his old farm and where we were. And from my kitchen window, I could see the bawbaws out here. Looked right out to the bawbaws. It was just lovely, yeah. Yeah, so they were tough days, as Adi said. They were tough times, but they were good times, really. And a bit of hard work doesn't hurt anybody, does it?
No.